Hello guys, welcome you to another lesson in our virtual classroom. And this lesson I would like to begin with an announcement with reiteration of what I've been writing in messages to you. And this is the fact that on each Wednesday and on each Friday, during the hours that are shown on the screen, I expect you to work on our subject. So I'm uploading new materials usually the day before, but during those hours, you have time to work on biology. I'm not giving you any extra work that will make you spend much more time above those 45 minutes twice a week. Uh, but I still want you to take a look at those videos. I'm uploading them 2 days a week. And I expect each of you to complete the task that is attached to the video, to the podcast, because from what I can see, some of you just ignore it, and that's not a good sign. I'm kindly reminding you that it's not the holiday time, and we are all working, but due to this weird thing with the virus going on, we have to do it on distance. And believe me, the solutions that we have worked out in our school are, in comparison to other schools that I've heard of, are just working perfectly. And you have a great chance to don't waste this time and to just benefit from it. Okay, guys, and today we're going to talk about to continue talking about our nervous system. And as usual, after talking about particular system, we go to the hygiene and general disorders of this. And guys, I would like to start with something that you know about already, I guess, and something that is with us all the time and will be throughout the whole life. And this is the stress. Po polsku oczywiście stres. And guys, what is stress? Uh, the simplest definition of stress is that it's the reaction of an organism uh, to changing circumstances in the environment. Guys, basically, it's a set of reactions in our body triggered by hormones. It's triggered by hormones, and mostly the stress hormones. I hope that you remember which one they were, which is cortisol and adrenaline. And guys, when we think about stress, we think about something bad, something that is destroying us, something that is not helpful at all. But this is not true. Apparently, there are two different kinds of stress. And guys, the stress that somehow naturally comes to our mind is in psychology and many other sciences called the distress, which is And in long term, it might give you the burnout, wypalenie, which means that basically you are tired of being under a constant impact of stress, and you start to lose your will to do whatever you're doing. And it might refer to school, it might refer to work, and this happens to many people apparently. And this is something that we should actually avoid, especially in long periods of time, because when we are exposed to distress for a really long period of time, not only it brings some bad consequences in terms of our mental health, but also it brings some physical symptoms. And we will talk about them in a second. And guys, there is also this kind of stress that we need, that drives us to do stuff, that helps us to motivate, that helps us to achieve better results, and this is called the eustress. And this is so-called the positive stress. And guys, it's really mobilizing. So, if you have a little bit of a eustress before, for instance, a celebration of learning or something, then this amount won't hurt you, nor physically, nor neither mentally, but it will help you to motivate, to achieve better results, to put some effort into the things you're doing, and as a result, it will help you. And this is something that we need. We need to function properly. This stress is really damaging, especially in longer periods of time, and we should avoid it. And guys, how is stress actually uh, affecting us? Effects of stress. Basically, in the first line, it just affects our bodies physically. So we can measure the level of stress by observing the following factors. For instance, when you are in stress, your heart rate and blood pressure is increased. Oh dear, what did I just do it here? Increase of blood pressure and heart rate, which is the number of heartbeats in a second, in a minute. Guys, then the next thing is the faster lung ventilation. In extreme cases of stress, this faster lung ventilation can become a shortness of breath, so-called hyperventilation. So the mechanical ventilation of lungs starts to happen so quickly that the gas exchange doesn't occur. So you start to somehow suffocate yourself and poison yourself with higher concentration of carbon dioxide in your lungs. This is, of course, temporary. You cannot die out of this in most of the cases, of course, because history knows some examples of when this was actually lethal. Our senses get more sensitive. So when you're in a stressful situation, you feel more, you see more, you hear more. Sometimes it's just really helpful when it's indeed a dangerous situation, but in most of the cases of everyday life, it's just it might be annoying. Digestion slows down. The body doesn't want to waste sources on digestion because this is not like the most important thing at a given moment. So it moves the sources to some other processes. So a common result of stress are problems with digestions, and I'm talking about constipation, Or the other hand, I'm talking about diarrhea. It depends really on person and on the type of stress that the person is exposed to. Of course, the brain activity increases. In a situation of stress, we start to think more, try to find the best solution. So this is the moment when our brains are the most active. And guys, the last one is muscle tension. Guys, do you know the feeling when something really dangerous is happening in your surroundings, and basically what your body starts to do is you start shaking. Your muscles are tense, and you start shaking after some time. This is actually thanks to adrenaline, because adrenaline is the hormone that will give you some extra boost of energy in case of being in danger. So, for instance, you have to run from something to avoid getting harmed. But adrenaline also in a way concentrates energy in muscles. After some time of you not running, just standing still and not using that energy, this energy has to be spent on something. So all that gathered energy in the muscles needs to be spent on, in this case, shaking. And guys, stress is something that we will never avoid. Like seriously, especially in the times of career, Instagram, and all those social media and social pressure and globalization. We cannot avoid stress at all, uh, and we have to deal with this. So we have to learn how to deal with stress, how to make the best out of your stress. Oh, I didn't really want to do this. How to make the best out of your stress and how to make the distress less harmful. So now it's the question how to deal with stress. And first of all, this is a really old strategy: prepare and get ready. So, if you know that a test at school is a stressful situation for you, it really is not the best idea to just stress out about it for a week before and just get crazy and lose your mind. Because after being exposed to a lot of distress in a longer period of time, you will start to feel it physically and mentally. So, what you have to do, if you know that a stressful situation is ahead of you, you should think about how to deal with this. So let's go back to this test. You have a test, you start to stress out about it. So, in order to avoid being in constant stress, you should plan your work. So, you say, "Oh, I have to learn this and learn that. So, I still have a week to go. So, on this day, I will spend like half an hour revising this, the next day half an hour revising that," and by basically keeping in contact with the stress, with something that causes stress, you actually get used to it and this becomes less stressful. And this is a strategy that is absolutely effective, but it cannot be implemented in some cases. I mean, in the case of an epidemic, because basically epidemic is something we never can predict. It's not scheduled anywhere. It just comes in and then just does what an epidemic does. So, situation like right now is happening is really stressful for basically most of the people, except for some of those who say, "Oh, screw this! Not. It's nothing. It's nothing bad. It's just another type of flu." Uh, and this is actually, in some of the cases, the way of dealing with stress. So we're on denial, this is not happening. But in some cases, just prepare and get ready is not enough. Another solution when prepare and get ready is not working is to distance yourself from the problem. And by distance, I'm not talking about, oh, screw this, not gonna do this. No, no, this is not the solution. By distance, I mean try to talk with somebody else about this problem so you can take a look at the same thing from a different perspective. Learning what it looks like from different perspectives might really help you to deal with this, and this is also a really good strategy. Plus, you get the feeling of being socialized, plus, you get the feeling of having support. So, as a result, by only just going into an interaction with other people, some good hormones are being released, like oxytocin or endorphin, and those hormones help you to uh, um, maybe how to say this? They help you to just neutralize the bad effects of distress. Guys, another thing is to release tension. And the best way of releasing tension is just physical activity. Although you feel tired after being physically active, after some point of being tired, your body starts to produce a hormone which is called endorphins. And those hormones are being called the hormones of happiness. So they also act like really strong drugs to make you feel better. Actually, hormones are drugs. They are present in really tiny amounts in our organisms, but they are really powerful, and they are more. Some of them are more powerful than known drugs. So this is the power that they have of dealing with everyday problems is actually really huge. Another way of dealing with stress is to sleep well. And guys, you have to sleep well, like a good amount of sleep. Of course, it requires a good rhythm of the day. I can see that some of you are replying to my messages at 10 in the evening, and this is like insane. School is supposed to work, you are supposed to work just as if the school was open normally. So from 8 to this 3 or 5, and actually the lessons are now shorter than usual. So I think that you should get a good amount of sleep. Actually, the younger you are, the more sleep you need. But still, many diseases, many complications and disorders from the nervous system could have been avoided if the person had enough sleep. And guys, also when you are exposed to a lot of stress, then you should get a good rest. But the good rest, I'm not talking about just sitting on a couch and peeking into the television or the computer and just looking at some silly things all the time, but I'm talking about active rest. So, a good walk, even if you're tired, a good walk outside, of course, not in the circumstances of an epidemic, but I believe that this sooner or later will be over. A good walk, even if you're tired, will be much more beneficial for you than just sitting on the couch because it also refers to physical activity, which releases some hormones that can help you, just like medicines or drugs, they can help you get rid of the feelings, of the bad feelings that you might have. And guys, let's talk about all the things that can maybe not kill you, not all of them in this case, but they might make your life miserable. Let's talk about diseases. Diseases. And guys, the very common disorder of the Nervous system is neurosis, nervica. And this is a disease that basically shows up as you unable to concentrate on anything, as you feeling irritated all the time, as you feeling anxiety and basically being nervous, like all the time you're tense. Not There are many things that can make you explode, and this might sooner or later transform into obsession. Natręctwo. Maybe you've heard this. OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Nerwica natręctw. Basically, in this disease, a person, in order to function, has to repeat the rituals that the person has developed themselves. So, for instance, it might be washing your hands like 5 times, counting everything. So you like feel forced to count all the steps that you're taking, or you have to like check 7 times whether the door is locked or not. Otherwise, you won't find that peace and you won't be able to function. This originates from neurosis, and this is something that needs some medical treatment. This needs a therapy, because the most severe cases of OCD might cause you not be able to function in the society anymore. So this is more like a mental disease, but still it's somehow connected to the nervous system, to neurotransmission. Another disease that might happen is the stroke, po polsku udar. Udar niedokrwienny. As a result of prolonged stress, of really long exposure to this stress, the physical response from your body can be so severe that something starts to break down. And in the case of stroke, your brain doesn't get enough of oxygen, doesn't get enough of blood, and it happens that the brain cells are starting to die. And this might lead to some problems with senses, some problems with motion, problems with speaking, problems with speech recognition, with speaking itself, and also it might lead to paralysis of the body or half the body. The other form of stroke is the hemorrhagic stroke, po polsku wylew. And this happens when a blood vessels just breaks in the brain and destroys physically the cells, because you have to know that brain cells are so delicate that even blood cannot have direct contact with them. What happens in your brain is the blood, the capillaries are are being away from the brain cells themselves, and they just release the oxygen, and the release is being transmitted like freely to the cells. So whenever you touch, they are so delicate that even a touch of a blood cell can destroy them. And actually, if you see somebody having a hemorrhagic stroke, this is quite easy to tell that this person is suffering from this, because you might ask them to smile and they will think that they are smiling, but they are not, and one of the corners of their lips will be falling down, because it usually affects only one side of the body. They might have problems with speaking. So, in case you see anybody like this, like feeling a little bit lost, feeling a little bit in stupor, so they are starting to lose like consciousness of space and time they are in, you have to call the ambulance as soon as possible because this kind of stroke, is really dangerous, and actually it has many consequences. And other diseases that can happen to your nervous system are meningitis and uh, encephalitis, czyli po polsku zapalenie opon mózgowych oraz zapalenie mózgu. Guys, if you see anywhere this suffix tis, itis, to be more precise, this means that this is a medical condition in which an inflammation is involved. So this means that a pathogen such as virus or bacteria is involved. So, in case of meningitis, those are meninges that are being infected by viruses or bacteria, and they cause the inflammation. And as a result of inflammation, the cells are being distracted. And in case of oh dear, encephalitis, it's brain that is being affected, and those are serious conditions that need to be treated as soon as possible because otherwise it might lead to death. Another disease, which is epilepsy. This is a disease that still has no like one single known reason why it happens, and the symptom is simple. Suddenly a person just lays down, starts to uh, their muscles just contract, the person falls down, loses consciousness, and starts shaking. In this case, whenever you see somebody having this attack, they should be laid on the floor with something soft under their heads, and that's it. You have to just wait until this finishes. You might call the ambulance, of course. The person will tell you what to do further in this particular case. This is a disease that any one of us can have. In some cases, it might be inactive for many years and suddenly, out of nowhere, might be triggered by some stimuli from the outside. For instance, the flashing lights are the known trigger for epilepsy. So, whenever you open a video game or some of the movies, there will be a board with a warning saying that if you have an epilepsy, you might not really want to watch this or play this. Guys, autism. On the contrary of the unfortunately more and more opinion of pro-epidemics, which are the people that just decline the activity of vaccinations and they state that they cause autism. No, vaccinations don't cause autism. Autism is actually a disease in which a person is not able to communicate effectively with others. Mm, because they don't really, actually there are many forms of autism. This is called the spectrum of autism because there are more and less severe forms of it, but usually the people that have autism, they have problems with expressing their emotions, they have problems with understanding others emotions, so they have problems with empathy. This is why we need to like be more uh, forgiving for them, because sometimes they will say the brutal truth that might hurt us, but they don't really like understand what they've done. They just said it because they felt it was okay to say it. Uh, and guys, this is a disease that is not, you cannot cure this, you have to learn how to live with this. Guys, another disease that might happen is the disease that I asked you about, and this is the multiple sclerosis. Po polsku stwardnienie rozsiane. Rozsiane. And guys, this is a disease that in which the myelin cover that covers that protects axons of neurons, it just disappears. It's being destroyed by the immune system of the body, and we don't really know why it develops. There are some ways of slowing down the process of multiple sclerosis, but we cannot cure this yet. And actually, it might be stretched to years. So once somebody is diagnosed with it, they have to be aware that after some time they will start to lose control over the body. And this is a really difficult and really awful disease because you're slowly starting to lose control over your body. You're slowly losing your consciousness because the nervous transmission is heavily abrupted because the axon is not protected well by myelin. Uh, you can just slow it down, slow the development by taking some medicines that slow it down and having a good rehabilitation, but still you cannot get rid of this. Another disease is the Alzheimer's disease. And this disease mostly touches older people. After many years, basically the brain cells start to die out. There is a research that states that one of the factors that increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease is a high concentration of aluminum ions in the food that you eat. And this happens when you eat or drink foods that have acidic pH, so they are acidic and they are kept in aluminum containers. By this, I mean Coke in cans. This beverage contains phosphoric acid and it comes into the reaction with the aluminum that is in the metal building the can. And huge consumption of this might really increase the risk of falling for Alzheimer's disease. Also, cooking in aluminum pans is the same case. So, a lot of aluminum ions just go to the food and then they concentrate and then they destroy brain cells. If it comes to the how to prevent yourself from Alzheimer's disease, uh, well, you have to use your brain. So constantly challenge your brain, constantly use your brain, stimulate it by playing in games that require quite a lot of thinking. Learn a new language. Learning languages is actually proven to really slow down the development of this disease. So basically, anything that makes your brain work. This disease is actually has three phases. And the first one is just forgetting. So the person was going somewhere and they forgot what they were supposed to do, and it starts to happen more and more and more often. Then stupor. Stupor po polsku otępienie. You start to feel lost. Like you have some problems with everyday chores, with speaking. You just constantly forget everything. Sometimes you might have some hallucinations, and you need to be supervised all the time. And then there is the loss of control. So you basically don't know who you are anymore. And it's also a really difficult disease, especially for the relatives of the person, because it looks like this. Mothers don't recognize their kids, nor grandkids. Brothers don't recognize their sisters. This is a really tough disease. And the people are like, physically they are able, but mentally they just don't know who they are, where they are, what they are doing, or they just get stuck in some period of their memory in the past and they stick to it. So they have problems with short-term memory. And guys, the last disease we're going to talk about today, because I can already feel that it's been a lot of time, depression. Guys, remember one thing. Just because you feel a little bit sad during autumn evening where it's just gray and it's raining and you just feel not the best doesn't mean you have a depression. Seriously, you might have a chandra, or you might have just a temporary lower down of your mood, but this does not necessarily has to be depression. Depression is a really serious disease. Basically, according to the statistics that I found in your textbook, 350 million people suffer from this, from which 1.5 million suffer from this in Poland. And according to the statistics, twice as many women as men suffer from this. And I would say that it's not necessarily true, because men tend to ignore the symptoms of depression. This is why the statistics are lowered. Much more people just suffer from this, but this is undiagnosed, and this is a really bad disease. Guys, the symptoms of depression are as following. So you basically, first of all, you constantly feel in a bad mood, constantly, regardless of what is happening. Uh, you lose your interests, you lose your hobbies because you feel powerless. Sometimes it just is so bad that you can't wake up, you can't get up from the bed to do everyday chores. Sometimes it's just insomnia, sometimes you could sleep all day. uh, the self-esteem is really lowered. Uh, Also, you might have some problems with appetite. You don't feel pleasure. You feel bland if it comes to your emotions. So everything looks the same. But the worst part of this, you might feel suicidal, of course, but the worst part of this disease is that in some cases, you still go outside, you still meet with your friends, and you still smile and have fun. Then only when you're alone, you're suffering from this. And this leads to the situations where people just didn't know that their friend, their brother, mother, sister, whoever was suffering actually from depression, because depression is not a disease that will be announced widely. This is something that people usually go through on their own when the doors and window blinds are closed. And guys, how to deal with this? First of all, therapy by psychologists, by therapists, and also depression is supported by medicines. So you take antidepressants, which are medicines that are designed to help you to bear with your emotions, but in reality, they just work more or less like this. They cut out the extreme spectrum of your emotions. So you feel a little bit numb in some cases. You just don't feel extremely happy anymore, but you don't feel extremely sad anymore. You just start to function as such, but still it needs some support from the therapist. It cannot be pills only, because this will not help. Uh, this is a really delicate disease. So whenever you see somebody with symptoms that might be pointing at depression. Please don't tell them, just get your stuff together and start working. Life is beautiful, because this is not going to help.